It's 11:11. Make a wish.
Hey, it's Shelly, and I'm not really featured in this episode very much because when I flew to Nashville to be on location so that Luna and I could record together, um, I had a crazy dysautonomia flare and I was out of commission pretty much the entire time. I want to talk about how a lot of what Luna and I talk about is intersectional in that we're disabled, we are neurodivergent, we're women, we weren't identified as neurodivergent until later in life, and this created problems for us, right? And so that's why we're here telling our story. There's no shortage of people on the internet telling their late diagnosis story who look like me. This podcast is a form of healing for both me and Luna, and there are several reasons why we're doing what we're doing. So a lot of the confusion around autism is that most people don't even know exactly what it is. This video isn't about that, but it's important to understand that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects how a person communicates and how they process sensory information in the world. In terms of why is sensory information communication? Body language, right? People often say people communicate with their eyes, body language. Before autism entered my life through my son's diagnosis in 2007, I didn't know much about it. I understood autism caused difficulties with social interactions, but I often incorrectly attributed that to intellectual disability or extreme behaviors that harmed others rather than examining what difficulties with social interactions looks like when it's presented on a different subset of individuals, let alone intersectional ones. By 2022, I got my clinical diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And by then, I had come to understand these conditions much better. Difficulties in communicating and with relationships, sensory issues. Oh, I get it now. I'm one of the hyper ones, hyperlexic, hypermobile, hyper independent, too high of an IQ for my own good. And probably anyone I could convince to listen to me, you get the idea. I was the quirky weird girl, smart girl. I definitely faked it while I was making it until I didn't want to be anymore. And my story is not unique, right? That is why there's an influx of humans who look like me talking about the different presentations of autism and ADHD. And Luna and I do the best that we can to address the different intersections that between the two of us, we touch a lot of them. But we also realize that the best way to uplift a marginalized voice is to invite them to your table and then center that discussion on their voice. And so that's what we're going to do in this episode. Little recap. In episode 3, we brought up this.
In 2023, the overall rates of ASD were consistently higher among Black children, 2.9%, Hispanic, 3.2%, and Asian or Pacific Islander, 3.3% children, compared to white children at 2.4%. I will say, however, the gender gap is quite wide, but 2023 was the first year the prevalence of autism exceeded 1% in girls.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and it is very rabbit hole-y. We are not going to rabbit hole. We're going to just have it recorded here for us to rabbit hole later. Do they have data on any shifts in other diagnoses decreasing during the same time frame?
That would be fascinating.
And so one day while I was resting this problematic meat suit, I did a deeper dive. And I was trying to find similar data to present. And, because it's April and it's gone from celebrating being aware of autism to now we're going to accept it. I couldn't find like exact numbers, but here are some things that I did find that I think it might be helpful for you to know in the frame of intersectionality. So according to the CDC, which is the organization that published the information that was presented in the video just then, among 8-year-old autistic kiddos, 38% also have an intellectual disability. So that means that about 62% do not have an intellectual disability. Okay. However, among Black children who have autism spectrum disorder, those with an intellectual disability is around 50%. Additionally, children who have an intellectual disability were typically diagnosed earlier than their peers without. I was trying to find if there was any data on if there's been a shift in oppositional defiance disorder diagnosis, conduct disorders, and what I could find is from 2018. According to current data, the lifetime prevalence of conduct disorder is 6.9% in Hispanics, 4.9% in Blacks, and 5% in whites. And then it says, Caucasian children are more likely to be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, whereas African American children are more likely to be diagnosed with conduct disorder, which definitely has a more negative connotation to it, right? That's why having these conversations is important, because once I was diagnosed and realized that I was autistic, and a lot of my communications I'm done. And without further ado, let's join Luna in Nashville on location and her interview with LyricalShkspr. Enjoy. Oh, one more thing before we get started. On top of all of the issues I had with my dysautonomia on this trip, the suite had some internet issues. So some of Luna's video and audio isn't synced up. If you're just listening, you may notice it a little bit. If you watch, you're gonna see it more. Sorry about that. We're still ironing out all of our on-location shooting procedures. Seems like every time we get together to shoot, record, whatever, one of us is sick. And so far, it's always been me. And that's... Anyway, let's go.
So one of the reasons, of course, like why we connected was obviously the hypermobility and neurodivergent stuff, but we're also creatives. So Lyrical, tell us about first who you are, and then we'll get to the other stuff.
Well, I am a multi-passionate, heart-centered entrepreneur who is the founder and creator of the Engaging Collective, which is going to be a online and physical space for people of all types of divergency, specifically those 18 and to about 100. Get an opportunity to meet in physical spaces as a way to bridge the intergenerational gap. I am a vocalist, a poet, a writer. I do a lot of things, but moreover, I'm just a person who enjoys learning and sharing the things that I've learned with others.
This is why we align, right? I love that our passions can intersect like this, and I love that TikTok brought us together to find other people like us. So I love that we found this idea that we can create a community and build onto that. The Hacking Hypermobility podcast is really about those two intersections of neurodivergence and our health conditions. Can you share a little bit about your journey, about how you initially came to know about inherited connective tissue disorders, what your diagnosis journey has been like, and that coming to the realization point?
Well, it's interesting that I didn't come to the realization a lot sooner that I was on the spectrum and that I was also ADHD, because I have spent the last 20 or so plus years working specifically with people with traumatic brain injuries and a wide variety of neurodevelopmental, I don't like to call them disorders, but for the sake of, that's what they call them, disorders.
Neurotypes.
Neurotypes, but being in the midst of it, but not being able to recognize it for myself. It wasn't until about 3 years ago, actually more like 5, because we dated for 3. I dated an individual who had 2 relatives who were on the spectrum and had a lot of the comorbidities related to connective tissue disorders. And she had casually mentioned that I might have Asperger's, like, hey, you might have Asperger's. And I was like, and at the time, I was like, nah, And over the course of seeing her interactions with her nephews, and then in my line of work, and then recognizing that I was burning out and I didn't want to completely burn out, it made me like do a complete total halt and really take a self-examination into myself. So I'm one of the folks who, getting a official diagnosis is very cost prohibitive. It's very expensive. I'm one of the folks that through my love of knowledge and my career were able to, I don't want to say self-diagnose, but self-examine myself, which is where the book came from, and realize that, you know what, I probably am on the spectrum. And I've followed quite a few different therapists and a lot of different researchers, and a big part of what I do is research. I recognize that my self-diagnosis is pretty spot on.
So how old were you when that was first presented to you by that former partner?
Let's see, I'm 40 now. I didn't start questioning for sure until I was about 38. And I started dating her when I was like 35.
I
Yeah.
find it almost hilarious how predictable those numbers are to me.
There's something
I
about
find
getting
a lot of
into
us that are ADHD, the combo of autism and ADHD and women are of course typically missed. And then you have even more intersectionalities that make it even more prohibitive to being identified. And then it takes, let's point out, it took a few years for you to process and research. So it's not just like self-diagnosis is, like someone says something, I look it up on like a quick, Wikipedia and be like, oh yeah, that's what I have. No, it was effort, right?
I ended up writing an entire book as a result of the amount of research I did, coming to the conclusion that I was in fact ADHD. Like, it wasn't like I did you're absolutely right. I did not do a Google search. I was actually not looking to be labeled, because no one wants to be labeled to be disabled in the first place. And being high functioning, presenting, and having an affect that says, oh, well, you don't look autistic, or you don't look like you have ADHD. It is not an easy thing to traverse. So no, it was not just a Google search or a Wikipedia search. It was.
Wow. How did you handle the identity crisis that pushes you towards?
I would say I had the opposite of an identity crisis. I think I had an identity realization, because it brought a lot of things into focus for me that I once questioned a lot about my self-esteem and confidence, and whether or not I fit in or was I an outlier. But once I realized that what I once thought were my personality quirks, being, having rejection sensitivity dysphoria, for example, or executive functioning issues, those are real things. And I was thinking that I was lazy or unmotivated, or feeling like I was a social outcast. But in reality, it was the understanding of who I was and how my brain worked helped me understand that nothing was wrong with me.
So undoing the like worthiness aspects of like thinking it's a character flaw, and recognizing this is part of your experience as a neurodivergent human, accepting disability, but also accepting that it's not the primary lyrical like It's just an aspect of who you are. Because when I asked you, tell me about who you are, it was not that. And I love
No,
that. Yeah.
thank you. I just feel like we're so many other things than just our experiences. What I have found in being that I am an unmasked, self-diagnosed woman of color who's part of the LGBTQIA plus community, lots of intersections there, and also being unmasked is frightening.
From my perspective, to me, you are brave. I understand you're terrified. It's terrifying for me to self-identify or reveal. How do you do that on a daily basis?
You know, I realize that, and this, I don't know if it's going to sound harsh or cold, but I believe that I'm a stoic. Everybody's got something going on. And at the end of the day, like, people are kind of murking through their own journey, their experiences, their messes. And if I spend so much time internalizing what they may or may not be thinking, saying, or doing with regards to how I choose to live my life, I won't have a life to live. And before the realization that I was on the spectrum, that's exactly what I was doing. I was eating myself into an early grave. I was not taking care of myself. I did not have boundaries. And the lack of self and the lack of esteem and confidence showed in everything that I did. My life is much different now, but the way I show up every day in the truest form of myself has afforded me a level of confidence and self-esteem I've never known in my life. So for that, it's worth it to keep showing up in spite of potentially being ostracized because of it.
On top of the social, emotional things that we have to reconcile, what did you realize about your health or your bodily experiences, and how did you come to understand things like the connective tissue disorders and hypermobility, the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, et cetera, that whole?
So right now, I'm in a whole heck of a lot of pain. I have a lot of pain. I realized that I was suffering from syncope, where and I didn't know where it was coming from. I was just fainting out of nowhere. And
That's
it was
not
just
scary at all.
No, that's not scary at all. And I worked in long-term care, and they kept attributing it to high blood pressure. Well, the high blood pressure was a result of me drinking 3 Red Bulls a day because I had so many people-pleasing tendencies because I was masking and high functioning. And I had gained so much weight because I was drinking 3 Red Bulls a day. I eventually ended up with a diabetes diagnosis. And that was the hard line in the stand for me. I was like, I don't want to be on insulin. So I started
Getting the diabetes diagnosis is when you were like, hey, I need to look at my health stuff.
Yeah, because doctors, and primarily it was doctors of color, honestly, who have told me in the last 15 or so years of my professional career in care that if I didn't quit my job or change careers, that it was literally going to end me. And because I was going in for syncope, I was going in for neuropathy, I was going in for headaches, I was going in for insomnia, I was going in for, anxiety. It was at first on the surface related back to my work, but really it was related to me masking my ADHD and my autism and going above and beyond. And also, and because of doing that, putting a lot of extra strain on my body that I couldn't go back to my career now if I wanted to, because I physically can no longer do it.
And ignoring your body and your health for those people-pleasing tendencies is very much goes back to, I call it traumatism, but the things that we've done to try to fit into the world as an undiagnosed neurodivergent, mostly unconsciously, subconsciously, we've done these things. They kept us safe. They kept us functioning. What I love about your story is that you've transmuted your pain and your suffering and the traumatism to, one, create beautiful art and to tell your story. Tell us more about the book.
Well, my book is called Unveiling the Hidden, and it is a study on neurodiversity and women of color. Not to say that neurodiversity doesn't exist in anywhere else, but the reality is that in multicultural communities, the diagnosis criteria is a lot different, and often women of color have a tendency to be misdiagnosed for other more severe disorders in the DSM-5, specifically schizophrenia, bipolar, DID, when in actuality, these are sometimes manifestations of masked ADHD and autism symptoms, but because we do not have enough culturally sensitive practitioners who are able to diagnose, moreover, sorry, let me go back. The book was written as a workbook for basically for myself, because I believe that what's the point of having knowledge if you keep it for yourself? So I started chronicling all the research that I was getting for myself. I know that because I have a love of words, sometimes I say things in really complicated ways. I was like, well, let me put it in a way that if I ever wanted to share it with like my sister or my nephew or any of my friends and family, that they would be able to understand it. And so that's where Unveiling the Hidden comes from. I do have 10 more free advanced copies if anyone would like one. Just shoot me your email address. But the idea was I wanted to be able to help people who don't necessarily have access to formalized care, because that's a reality for a lot of people. It is not meant to be a diagnostic tool, but moreover, an self-examination of, that kind of sounds similar. Maybe I might want to do some further research for myself and see maybe is this something I might be confronted with.
Given your experience, you realize how little support there was in the field or knowledge. You created your own tool to be there for someone else through your verbal processing, audio processing. That we have a tendency to do that. That's why we have a podcast. I love that you use your experience, in the fields you were in before, and your experience through your journey to give someone a resource when these resources just don't exist. So have you been diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder also? Have you been able to access the medical care to deal with the related health conditions, or no?
No, not yet. I am suspicious that because of the severity of pain I experience in terms of, I have a lot of back pain. And I can't determine, I haven't determined if it's a result of working in care and lifting people for the last, all my life, or am I experiencing connective tissue disorders?
Do you have disc issues and stuff, or do you even know yet?
I went to a chiropractor for a year. I do have some disc issues. I did walk with a cane for a while in my early 20s, but because I'm so stubborn, I won't use a quad cane anymore. I do, like, when it comes to like my day-to-day household things, like I can't stand to cook dinner. I have a chair in the kitchen. Yeah.
How else do you accommodate your physical differences?
All the time. I would say most days I'm about 50% of the day I'm in a tremendous amount of physical pain, but I'm also like super stubborn, so I push through a lot. Like I can't sit up for very long periods of time. I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I wouldn't be surprised if I had lupus or multiple sclerosis. I would not be surprised at all.
So would it be a correct assumption of me to make that there's barriers to healthcare also? The same as
Absolutely.
a lot of us who experience the assumption that maybe we're dealing with a hypermobility issue. Have you experienced that in like talking to a doctor, that sort of thing?
Being a woman of color, there is this assumption that our pain is different or non-existent, or that when one is addressing a concern with long-term chronic pain, that it is the attempt to get something else, when in actuality it is just to be able to maintain one's physical ability. I have seen, researched, and heard so many stories about women, and also women of color, going into their physicians trying to get diagnosis and having basically to become subject matter expertise themselves just to be able to convince the physician that what they're telling them is true. And then also, I have seen instances where physicians have treated women as though they're hypochondriacs for being well aware of what their body and what their research is telling them. And it can be very discouraging to go into your practitioner's office and being gaslit about your pain and your experiences.
Looking forward, do you have any insights that you would give to a younger woman of color that is starting down this path of thinking, I might be autistic, I might be ADHD, I might have these health issues? Where would you suggest they begin or avoid being so overwhelmed with all of these things? What helped you?
Well, what helped me was re-examining from my own lens my experiences and trying to quiet out the noise from what everyone else's perception of my reality was. And once I was able to like bring down the noise, I was able to experience my experiences from my own, like my own true perspective, instead of me trying to mask or to fit in or to please people, but really, how did I really feel in that experience? And then I started writing that down. And then I started kind of keeping track of, okay, I repeat the same thing a whole bunch of times. Okay, I really only eat French fries like every day because that's my safety food. Okay, and started doing a compare and contrast. Not to be seeking to match whatever the criteria is, but rather write down your experiences and see if you can see your experiences reflected in data sets that have already been established. But also keeping in mind that diagnostic criteria for people of multiple cultural groups is going to be different. And for me, that was kind of hard because I was like, I kind of see it, but I'm not a 12-year-old Caucasian young male. So my experiences are going to be different. And so in my book, I created little checklists that account for multicultural differences. Like, for example, I have sensory overload. But if I were to tell my practitioner that, they would say, well, you live in a house with all of your relatives and, you know, that's to be expected. But that's a multicultural difference when you live in Black and brown houses, Hispanic houses. Just because that's the nature of the environment doesn't mean that that takes away from their diagnosis.
Doesn't discount the validity.
Right. Or talking about other comorbidities, not just interconnectivity issues, but also talking about adverse childhood experiences, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and how those things also overlay with autism and ADHD diagnosis for all parties. Because the reality is that all of those things are layered within our experiences and they're not a separate part, if you know what I mean.
Right. So like if you were just a neurodivergent human and you would only experience the trauma of growing up and trying to fit into the world with a different neurotype, okay, that's a lot. Now you add on the experience of a person of color we're in the United States and the context of what that means. And you have really dual masking. That's the intersection here. And then throw in you're a woman, then throw in you're a part of the rainbow mafia, throw in you're a creative. You know, there's so many things here that put us as an outlier, just in the common experiences that you and I share. And then you throw in the cultural differences where you're always othered in medical, psychiatric, all of that. What are some of the patterns you've seen within your community of neurodivergence or these health issues that you think aren't part of the criteria but would be applicable for these other cultures?
What I've noticed in my community is that there is a steadfast resistance to even acknowledging the hereditary nature of ADHD and autism.
I didn't cause this.
No, what do you mean? What's
Yeah.
wrong with you? Well, it didn't come from me. Well, Grandpa, you eat the same banana and mayonnaise sandwich every day for the last 50 years. Grandpa, you most certainly are on the spectrum. You don't like nobody touching your brown pants you wear every single day with the same green shoes. But no, couldn't be.
So I'm laughing on the outside. You know, I'm very white presenting, but I come from multiple ethnicities and I've been around Black culture and friends and family. And there's so many things in what you just said that ring true. Like, I know people that would say these things. And so also, like, culturally, I think it's part of culture, right? Into to have these particular experiences. So it's so funny that we can just sit there and see, like, no, this is just how I am. That's not at all that's not an autism thing.
Or pray it away. We don't get them demons out of you. You know, the whole thing about religion and how religion circumvents good common sense. Not to say that religion doesn't have its place, because it does. However, sometimes religion, especially in Black and brown communities, is the deterrent from many individuals getting the help that they need early enough on for it to make a bigger impact in the quality of their life long term. But because a lot of people in BIPOC communities are not ready to have those conversations, it actually does the youth a disservice, because now they are repeating patterns and mindsets from people who didn't have the ability, or didn't want to, or have the ability to get the help they needed, and it creates a cycle.
Right. And oftentimes there's much bigger concerns, right? Especially if you were, you know, a woman of color and, you know, you're gay. Like, I'm sure you were more, I'm making assumptions. I'm sure you were more worried about other things in your youth than these things, right?
Well, honey, no assumptions made. I grew up in foster care. I went to 12 different schools. I moved around. I almost did not graduate from high school. My mother is severely mentally ill, and that has been a challenge. That was the other part of this journey. Me and my sister were talking about it, and I hypothesized when I started thinking about my journey into diagnosis. I started thinking, what if my mom's diagnosis was wrong? What if my mom was actually autistic, ADHD, and had complex post-traumatic stress disorder with ACEs? And because she went untreated for those things her entire life, that it developed into what is now her psychosis and schizophrenia, bipolar.
How it's progressed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also probably medicated, I'm assuming, periodically on and off. I don't know if you know this, but the research in the genetic causes of schizoaffective disorder and autism spectrum disorders has genetic overlaps. So
Yes.
I don't think your lived experience is that far off base at all. I'm sure we will eventually start listening to people of color and be like, oh, you were right. I was just saying, I don't think we can untie the complex traumas from that experience from most communities, but particularly yours.
Yes. I also think that the way that the systems are set up to basically, I hate to say it, but to fail most people, because my mom has been dealing with this, I'm 40 years old, my entire life. And it's become a cycle of where they're aware of it, but no one who's able, they have more access than we do, to be able to truly help her. And now, as a result of having decades of being on the medications for what I suspect probably was the wrong diagnosis, she now has cancer. When we talk about access to affordable healthcare, but also equitable, and making sure that the treatments fit the condition. So that was a lot of the impetus behind me trying to figure out what was wrong with me, because I was like, am I crazy? It had me questioning my sanity.
Yeah. I'm sure it did, especially your experience. You know, you were that ripped apart a family. Even if she wasn't capable because of her situation, she wasn't given the chance to be capable for you, for your sister. Now, do you have other people in your family who've come to this realization or self-identified yet?
I doubt that will ever happen.
Yeah.
I have 14 uncles and aunts. From my observation of my family, I will say that I'm not particularly close, and with good reason. But from my observations, it's a large enough data set to be able to see lots of overlap and parallel if you're paying attention to the patterns. And I would suspect that about half of my aunts and uncles are most likely on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely have ADHD. It's a large enough data set to where, because I'm real quiet and I observe, they don't like me being around because I'd be like,
Yeah.
Um,
Same.
yeah. And then having the added challenge of growing up in and out of foster care. So the weird thing was when my mom would cycle and be like on the upswing, they would put us back with her. And then she would understandably decline again because that's the nature of the disorder. And we'd
And
back in care.
parenting is hella overstimulating.
Yeah.
No offense to little you.
No worries.
Yeah.
Being big me and looking back on it, like I don't hold any resentment with regards to it, but realizing how poorly prepared a lot of people are, especially women of color, are to being parents, and then having the added obstacle of being on the spectrum and not being aware of it, questioning your identity, questioning your sanity, questioning, how you fit in the world. A lot of people, I looked at some statistics about how often people on the spectrum, harm themselves because they don't understand what they're experiencing. And that was a big part of that's a big part of why I do the Engaging Collective, why I try to keep safe space on my TikToks and do karaoke, because it's the one language that seems to bring a lot of my friends together.
Yeah.
And while I don't necessarily talk directly about being neurodivergent on my lives and on my TikToks and on my social media, I do provide the resources for those who would be interested in them. And I also try to provide conversations where we can talk about it in a way that doesn't make people feel as though they're being labeled, but maybe give them a sense of, I see a little bit of me in there. Maybe I might want to start asking some questions instead of questioning whether they should be here or not. And that makes me sad.
So it's amazing to me to find the people that are doing the work to undo the generational trauma, stand up to the systems that are not just not set up to, do the right thing, but they're flat out oppressive. And what I hear you saying is the answer that, our little group has come to the conclusion of, and that's our intersection, is the answer is really to go back and create a community where ours was taken away. Tell me more about, the collective and where does that space exist for you?
It originally started as a creative studio that has a physical space when I was still in Georgia. I had a 22-person classroom. And as you know, those of us in the club, we tend to have lots of special interests, and I like to make things. So I had opened this studio where I was showing people how to press t-shirts and how to sew, embroider. I was giving voice lessons. I happened to be fortunate enough to share a creative suite next to two child psychologists who did assessments for younger students who were trying to determine if they were on the spectrum or not, which was very helpful in me.
Sometimes fate is wild.
I know,
like
right?
Just the fact that we put those two next to each other in the universe.
Like next door, like I could reach out and touch his door. And that was a big benefit, because if not for that, how often do you have access to a child psychologist who's willing to talk to you about ADHD in adults?
Yeah.
So the collective originally started as a physical space, but because life and I made a lot of sacrifices towards self-discovery, don't have the physical space anymore. Then eventually I started dreaming about having it in a standalone store in the mall in JCPenney specifically. I want to turn the JCPenney into a physical space to reclaim spaces in malls all over the country, to have a physical location where outliers, specifically those of us on the spectrum, have a place to congregate and to do the things that really bring us joy. Like, I don't like day parties. I don't want to go out to the club, but I want to play checkers and chess and Scrabble. And I want to talk about history and art. And, you know, I want to share these experiences with people. So eventually I would like to go back to having a physical location. But right now it's online. We mainly meet on TikTok. I do have a Discord and a Twitch stream and all of the other things in YouTube, but I provide resources from my book. I provide actual resources from actual therapists, not just myself. I have partnered with about 50 on TikTok in terms of building community. In addition to that, on my page, I provide, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the collection section, but for me, it's very helpful for me to catalog everything because I'm a nerd. So I use it like a library. Yeah, so I have an ADHD like library, and you can go in there and it has all kinds of hacks. It even has things from you guys on there too. Some of your videos and things about just different exploration into ADHD and autism. I have things on art history, but basically it is a way for us to connect, whether it's digitally or in space.
So basically it's like, this is my little internet archive of a particular special interest that I have, that if you share it, that is, I think, is a great resource right here. I love that. So it's like the collective space, just digitally.
Yes.
So there are various spaces coming up, digitally and otherwise, and other creators. And, you know, I've talked about on my own platform, not necessarily with the show, but about like making the joke that we need a zebra commune. Like, we need a collective, right? So that's very much the need that that's the pattern I see, is that those of us in this space who are actively trying to undo the generational trauma of being undiagnosed are trying to say is like, hey, we need this. How do we do this? And we're kind of all like maybe in our own little islands expressing that or doing it. How do you think we gain momentum as a group? I would like to find a way to start linking us all together and maybe getting enough momentum for those of you like trying to do these things in the community to have that space or that physical community somehow in our areas. Like, that's where I see it going.
I agree. One of the things that I've been working on with the Engaging Collective specifically is working on business planning and getting it out of my head and onto paper. What does this actually look like? What do the logistics look like? Who are our partners? Who would be the organizations that would support our efforts, who have a bigger platform and a broader reach, and who can bring the other grassroots efforts together? Like, for example, what I would really like to see happen is to be able to, like I said, have an Engaging Collective or some type of collective in every mall, because it usually has regular transportation via buses. So it makes it a little bit more equitable. Having a big box location has its own hours, so that, you know, for a lot of us, we're night owls.
Department store versus.
Yeah. Making it to where maybe we could have some apprenticeship programs where we're able to bridge the gap from our generations with the older and younger generations, because I think collectively a lot more of us are on the spectrum than we would probably care to admit. And that if we could see our experiences from young, middle, up, then maybe we could have some type of collective cooperation. I think that if, like, for me, I've been doing like a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. In 10 years, I'd really like to see an Engaging Collective in every mall in America as a way to revitalize the spaces, but also to give us meeting spaces for support groups, for physical therapy, as a way to, for those of us who are incredibly skilled individuals who don't necessarily want to work in our professions, but still want to be able to share our expertise to do, you know, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I think that
So,
might be a way to
Lyrical, a lot of this is about us within our community, supporting our community. I think part of what's going to get us over the edge is extending beyond the neurodivergent community to, to ask for help and support and engagement and be part of this collective effort. So our listeners, they may not be exactly like us, but they're probably trying to understand someone in their life like us or are going through this. Where should we send them to learn more about your efforts? What's the best place to connect with you?
Right now, because I do really well with written communication more so than verbal communication, if we could add to the show notes my email address, that would be greatly
I
appreciated.
will.
Right now, my website is being revamped. I used to provide all types of audio-visual playlists from world-leading experts like Teepa Snow. I work in dementia care, so she's a dementia care expert, but also things for people who are taking care of loved ones at home. Exercise routines for limited mobility was very important for me. These are like seated routines that are not boring. So once my website is back up, it's LyricalShkspr.com. But right now, if you would like to email me, that would be greatly appreciated. I am on all social media, and I am also a brand ambassador for Radio Pushers at 99.7 The Heat Miami. So I'm also on iHeartRadio if you guys ever want to take a listen. And yeah.
Awesome. And then the other thing that we struggle to talk about, and I'm saying we as in Hacking Hypermobility, the podcast, and probably we as a collective, as neurodivergent humans and women, I don't think we do this very well to say, hey, if you want to monetarily support my efforts, here's where to go. Do you have anything like that set up, Lyrical?
Yes, I do. And I'm terrible about doing those things. In fact, I've been giving away my books and all my resources for free because I wrote them to help me. And I just felt so bad about charging for them. But I do have Cash App. It's Lyrical Shakespeare. I have Zelle. It's my email address. If you would like to donate, that would be perfectly fine. I am in the process of putting together a speaking tour, which I am looking for sponsors, because I would like to be able to go throughout different care communities, specifically those working with older adults 55 plus, and also foster youth who have aged out, as a way to provide a bridge to have these conversations a little bit sooner and to reduce psychotropic medications within long-term care communities by addressing the unaddressed neurodivergency that exists in our elders.
I love that your heart is with our geriatric community. Also, I worked with geriatrics for a good part of my career. When I talk about my own family's experience, I think that's what kills me, is knowing my grandparents, all of them experienced different flavors of neurodivergence and disability, and how much that shaped our lives. Watching their experience just as a grandchild and knowing, the problems with addiction, the physical pain, the early deaths, the loss, the trauma within the family. So I love that we have the opportunity, those of us who've had some slightly better resources, to also serve not just those of us young in the community younger than us, but maybe the older people in our community too, that are still with us and could use love and support. I think that helps to undo the pain that we have of being kind of lost children in this. I love that perspective. Thank you. I have one last silly question, and you can say no. Will you sing for us?
Sure,
Are you
I will
prepared?
sing. Sure, I am prepared to sing. Did you have anything in particular in mind?
No, I want you to use this moment as your expression for the show.
You know what? One of the things that I realized about working with older adults is that I worked as an activity director. Reducing psychotropics was a big deal for me, because oftentimes we get granddad or mom or whoever come in and they're historical loners, right? And daughter or whoever, they want them to be super social. Well, turns out granddad don't like nobody but one person, and they got a favorite person. I used to be the favorite person. And the reason I was the favorite person is because I would sing often to my residents. And with today being the official observance of Veterans Day, how about I do? All right,
I
let's
would
see.
love that. Do it.
God bless America, land that I sing beside her, and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans wide with more. God bless America. Oh, sweet home, God bless America. Oh, sweet home.
Thank you.
No, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate you, Luna and Shelly, for having me on your show, Hacking Hypermobility. I really appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to share about my book and my experiences, but also sharing your experiences with me. And I hope that we get an opportunity to build our collectives together and to see how we can help more folks.
I would love that. I'm going to close down the episode right now just by expressing one, this is why she's called lyrical, y'all. Two, if you are only listening, I need you to go pop into YouTube and just go see what a light lyrical is too, because you're stunning. Your light as a human is powerful, and I'm so thankful that you've chosen to work through the stuff that has gotten in your way and be part of an effort to make the world a different place. So thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today and be vulnerable and share your experience and your wisdom.
Thank you, love. I appreciate you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, love. Thank you.